Hello again, everyone. Many apologies for those technical difficulties we just experienced, and I hope this is going to be a lot better. I'm not too sure how much of what I did before you were able to catch, so I'm going to go back over everything, and hopefully that won't be repetition for too many of you. So welcome to today's virtual family day. This week is all about Hewson School of Anatomy. Now, very helpfully, Enid, who I can see has joined us again, explained to us that anatomy is the study of the body. So it's part of biology and can be described as trying to understand the structural organization of living things. So that could be human bodies or animal bodies. That's one of our key vocabulary words for today. And then you're probably wondering what an anatomy school would it be, or a school of anatomy. So remember, Benjamin Franklin lived at 36 Craven Street, which we now call Benjamin Franklin House, during the 1700s. And that time in England was known as the Georgian period because there were several kings called George who were on the throne. And at that time, there was growing demand for trained surgeons, but there weren't many places that would do that training. There was the College of Surgeons, so there weren't enough places for all the people who wanted to train. And that's why these private anatomy schools started to appear, especially across London. So then the final question from this title page, you may be wondering, is who was Hewson? And what does he have to do with Benjamin Franklin and 36 Craven Street, which was the house that Ben Franklin lived in for almost 16 years in London? And to answer that question, I need to tell you a little bit more about what brought Benjamin Franklin to London and who else he was living with at 36 Craven Street. Now, I wonder if some of you know a bit about this already, if anyone would like to share what they know already about this. I can see a raised hand from Enid.
I think I know a little bit about the guy who lived with Benjamin Franklin.
Right.
I believe that they found human bones underneath that house, and I believe that was from one of his science experiments.
Very great. Thank you, Enid. And I hope, can you hear everything okay now?
Yes.
Brilliant, thanks so much. So glad you could join again. Fantastic, yes, so that's quite right. So Hewson was another scientist because remember, the main reason Benjamin Franklin came to London was for his politics. Someone, when we did the class a moment ago, mentioned the Independence War. So he came representing America, or the colonies as they were known then, and he was trying to find a way forward for England and America, because when he first arrived here, in 1757, America was still part of England, but after those 16 years, it was becoming clear that wasn't going to be possible. And when he left in 1775, that was when there was the War of Independence. I can see we've got another raised hand, so someone may want to add something else. Hello? So I'm asking to unmute. Hopefully you're getting a prompt to help unmute. Okay, well, possibly it was a mistake, the raise hand, but if you do want to add something a bit later, raise your hand again, and I will unmute you again. Okay, so yes, he came over for his politics, but also his science, and he did lots of science while he was here. He'd come over to Craven Street with his eldest son, William, who helped him with those jobs, but they didn't live on their own in the house. So they were lodgers, which meant they had a landlady, and she was a lady called Margaret Stevenson. Now, let me show you some portraits of the different people that Benjamin Franklin lived with. Unfortunately, we don't have a portrait of Margaret Stevenson. She was the landlady who was in charge of the house, and she was quite a wealthy widow. But we do have a portrait of her daughter, Polly, who you can see in the middle of the screen here. And Benjamin, remember, he lived here for nearly 16 years, so he did become really close to both Margaret and Polly. And since Polly had lost her father, he kind of took on an adoptive father figure role for her. And so when Polly would go on to marry William Hewson, who you can see on the left, who would run the anatomy school we're going to talk more about, Benjamin Franklin actually walked her down the aisle at their wedding. So they were very close. Now let's hear more about William Hewson. So he trained as a surgeon in Edinburgh in Scotland, and then came to London and worked with some very famous anatomists called the Hunter brothers. So on the right of the screen, you can see a portrait of William Hunter that's in the Royal Academy of Arts. And their anatomy school was also in central London, not too far from where we are at 36 Craven Street. And he learned a lot from them, but he wanted to have his own school. So after marrying Polly, he was able to do that at 36 Craven Street in what was then the garden, but now is our basement in the museum. So the reason that we know more about this anatomy school and the work of William Hewson is that in the 1990s, when people were doing lots of conservation work on the building at 36 Craven Street so that they could open it as Benjamin Franklin House, they were in the basement and doing some digging and uncovered over 1,200 pieces of bone, which was a bit of a surprise, but it did uncover this really interesting medical history. So let me show you some of those images. So these are some of our Craven Street bones. And if you go on our website, you can read more about this. And we also have some 3D images of some of them, so you can look at them more closely. So there were, as I said, over 1,200 pieces of bone found here. And a lot of those have the traces of the surgical techniques that the medical students Dr. Hewson was training were practicing. So you can see the cuts in the skull here. And when you look closely at this femur bone from the thigh, there are some kind of jagged marks that show that it's been sawn here. Now, there weren't many bodies that were given up for this medical practice of allowing surgeons to practice these surgical techniques. So we think that William Hewson had to use grave robbers. So that was people, or body snatchers, they were sometimes called, who would take bodies from graveyards, which hadn't yet been made illegal. So this is what was found in the 1990s, and we have some of the bones still at the house today, but some of them are actually at the University College London, as their archaeologists came and did the excavation of the site. So that's the story of our Craven Street bones. Now, something else interesting that we found with the bones, most of them were human bones, but there were some animal bones. And one of those, which we have on display, was some turtle bones. Now, and there were also traces of mercury, which links the bones with the experiment which William Hewson is most well known for, which is when he injected a turtle with mercury, and that helped him to show how the lymphatic system worked. And for that, he actually won the Copley Medal, which is given by the Royal Society. It's almost like, at the time, almost like a Nobel Prize for Science. And he won that in 1769. And then after marrying Polly and getting to know Benjamin Franklin helped Hewson to be able to join the Royal Society in 1770. So that's the story of the anatomy school at Craven Street, and it really was William Hewson's school. He was running it while Benjamin Franklin was there. He opened it in 1772, and Benjamin Franklin didn't leave until 1774. So he may well have been interested in what was going on, but it was really run by William Hewson rather than Benjamin Franklin. So that's the history part of today's session, and now we're going to kind of link that with what we know about science. So thinking a bit more about the skeleton, I wonder if anyone thinking about what you might have learned already in school or at home about the skeleton, does anyone know any of the names of the major bones that we can see on the screen, or does anyone think they could explain what the skeleton is for, what its purpose is? Great, I can see we have 2 raised hands. Hello? So I think you may still be muted, but if you unmute your microphone, you can ask your question. Hello? Did you want to tell us some of the bones, or?
Yes, a skull.
Great, thank you. That's the big one we can see on the left, the skull. So that's the bone in our heads. Thank you very much. Were there any more you wanted to add, or did you think you could explain what the skeleton's for, what it helps us with?
It helps us with, like, when you see something, it goes up into your brain and then it tells you what it is.
Great, so that's what our brain does, and you're quite right, the skull is protecting our brain. So that's one of the key jobs of the skeleton. It's to protect all those really important organs we have. So the skull protects the brain, the rib cage protects the heart and the lungs. Thank you so much. Let's see what Enid wanted to add.
I wanted that whole human body itself is made to protect organs and muscles.
Yeah, definitely. And also thinking about the skeleton, if we didn't have a skeleton, do you think we'd be able to stand up straight?
Yes, that is true.
Pardon?
What?
If we didn't have a skeleton, do you think we'd be able to stand up straight? Our bodies would be all straight like they are, or do you think they might go floppy?
They would be more like jelly.
Yeah, more like jelly, exactly. So another important job they have is they help us keep standing up. Thank you, Enid. Okay, great. So so yes, those are two of the key jobs of the skeleton. So we're going to look at another important one. Oh, was that another thing you wanted to add, Enid?
No, I was just putting my hand down.
No worries. Okay, so let's have a look. Right, so we spoke about the skeleton giving us support and structure and also protecting our organs. So on the right of the screen, this is the CAT scan. So you can see those organs around the bones. And at the bottom of the screen, we have something called blood cells. So bones, part of the larger bones is something called bone marrow, and in there red blood cells get created, and there are the two important types. You have the red blood cells that transport oxygen around the body, so the oxygen we take in when we breathe, and we need to get it to all parts of the body. And then also the white blood cells, so really important to remember, particularly at the moment, they're the ones that fight infection. So many important jobs that the skeleton does. Now, just to run through, you told me some of the names of the bones, but we'll go through them. So a lot of bones have a kind of more familiar name that we might use more often, and then a more scientific name. So I'll try and use a bit of both. So just like one of the participants said, the bone that protects your brain in your head, that is the skull. It can also be called the cranium. Then you have your clavicle or your collarbone. And then in the middle of the rib cage, there's the sternum, or it's also called the breastbone. Then you have your rib cage, which is super important and protects lots of organs. Then you have your spine. This might be one you've heard of, sometimes called your backbone. And it's actually made up of lots of little bones that are called vertebrae, or vertebra, it's one of them. Then on your arms, you have your humerus, which is the top part. And then on the lower part, you have the radius and the ulna. Now, one of those bones we saw an image of, and it's the one that you can see kind of in 3D on our website, is the femur. So that's your big thigh bone. Then you have your kneecap, but the scientific word is patella. And then on your legs, the bigger bone at the front is the tibia, and the smaller one at the back is the fibula. And one that's not labeled here, but that's also important, is the pelvis, or your hip bone in the middle. Okay, so now we've gone through some of the names of the bones. I have actually got with me a model skeleton. So I hope you're listening carefully, and I'm just going to point to some of the key bones, and we'll see if anyone can help us by telling us what they're called. So I know we already knew the skull. So what about this bone here? Does anyone think they remember what this one was called here? Hi, Enid.
Hi, I believe it's the collarbone.
Yeah, the collarbone, and can also be known as the clavicle. Thank you so much. Okay, and then we have this important one. What are these called? All these bones together? Okay.
I couldn't see what you were pointing at. Was it the rib cage?
It was the rib cage, thank you. And then what was this one we just mentioned? Maybe if our other participant would like to have a go at this one.
I can have a go.
Just make sure that you're able to unmute. So if you'd like to. What do you think this one's called?
I know.
Hello?
Hip. They're the hips.
Yeah, the hip bone, thank you. And the more scientific word is the pelvis as well. Brilliant, thank you so much. And let's just do one more. So a really important one at the back. Enid, did you want to have a go at this one? This one at the back.
The spine or backbone?
Yeah, brilliant. And remember the little...
It says the connecting.
Yeah, exactly. And remember the little ones that make it up are called the vertebrae. Thank you so much. Really great participation, everyone. So I'm now going to show you the craft activity that you could maybe try at home. So it's making your own skeleton, and to help you remember those bones, you can maybe even label it. So this is what it would look like. And so to make this, you don't need too many things. I'll just show you the different things that you'll need and then explain how you would make it. I won't make it kind of during the class. It takes a little bit of time, a bit of concentration, but I'll explain how you would do it. So you would need some paper, and it's easier to see if the paper is black, but you can use any paper, and you could always take white paper and paint it black, or just use white paper, but the white shows up a bit better against the black. So some paper, and then you need some cotton buds or some earbuds, and they're going to make up our skeleton. Some scissors. Some PVA glue and something to hold it in, and a paintbrush as well. And then a white crayon or pencil. And for my one, I printed out a little cartoon skull and a cartoon hip bone or pelvis because they were a bit trickier to make with the earbuds, but you could always draw these if that's easier. So just to show you again how you would make it. So if you are drawing or printing out the skull and the hip bone or pelvis, then you might want to start by putting those on your paper. And then you would start to stick down your cotton buds, and some of them you might need to cut to make them the right size. So you stick them into where the bones would go. And then once you've done that, to help you remember what the names of the different bones are, you can try labeling them with your white crayon or pencil. Does anyone have any questions about how they would do that at home? I can see Enid has her hand up. Hi, Enid.
Well,
did you have any questions?
I forgot to lower my hand.
That's okay. Did you have any questions either about the craft or about anything we did today?
No.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining. And oh, I think we do have a hand up from someone else as well. So we'll just see if there are any more questions. Hello again.
Okay. How?
Oh, I think you've just muted again. Let me unmute. There we go. Sorry.
Can you write using chalk?
Chalk, yeah, chalk would work as well. And you only need the white pencil if you're using black paper, so it will show up. But if you were using white paper, you could use a normal pen. But yeah, chalk would work well, exactly. Thank you both so much again for joining. And for bearing with us while we had some technical difficulties. We really hope you enjoyed the class. And remember, if you do think of any questions or would like to send us photos of what you end up making for your skeleton, then you can get in touch via email to education@benjaminfranklinhouse.org. I think I see another hand up. Let's check. Did you have another question? Okay. Well, do get in touch via email if you do have follow-up questions. And next week we are going to have another class. This time it's going to be a bit more history based, so thinking about a bit more about the Georgians we started talking about, more about that character of Polly, who we spoke about earlier on in the class, and thinking about fashion in Georgian England and what that was like. So we do hope you'll be able to join us for that. Thank you so much again for joining us today, and see you soon. Goodbye.